April 12th at a little after 7:30. And I'm calling this special board meeting to order, and we need roll call.
Charles Blacklands.
Here.
Kevin Boyles.
Here.
Tom Hageland.
Here.
Ruth Nelson.
Here.
Janice Shogren.
Here.
Sarah Spear.
Here.
All present.
Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we are recording this meeting, but it'll be it won't be able to be accessed until after all of these interviews are done. So we have approval of the agenda as presented.
So move.
Second. First from Director Boyles, a second from Director Spear. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Not in favor, same sign. Motion carries. And we do not have any public input since this is a special board meeting. And so we can go to the main purpose of this board meeting, and that's the interview of our first superintendent candidate, Dr. Heidi Hahn. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you. So
Long day. So.
it has been an amazing day. Like I said, I feel like I've been on a field trip all day.
Are you still enjoying it though?
Every second.
Field trip?
Yeah, this field trip. Dinner was great. No, it's been a wonderful. And I think about energy. People say you'll go home and be exhausted, and that's definitely not what this day has done for me. If anything, it's rejuvenated and re-energized me in the work I do. So thank you for the gift of this.
Okay. Wonderful. So, anyone want to start with a question, or I can start if you'd like, and then we'll go around. Sound good? Okay. You mentioned that one of your top, I think you had 4 priorities, was the strategic plan, and we heard some about that in the community meeting too. Just describe a little bit more about what you're thinking on that process, who would be involved, timing.
Well, I think the data that exists through this process that's coming from focus groups and just some of the survey data is a wonderful starting point. So I think looking at that and then going back to those key stakeholders and gathering that input of what they see as next steps. I feel some of the vision or the things I've had have definitely been changed in conversations I've had today. I think one area of emphasis, which I heard from the community side, was really on our businesses and where businesses are at and what they see as a need. So in developing that, I really look at spending, even though I've been here, spending a lot of time getting those conversations going and learning to be able to bring that forth. And then working with our leadership team to work together and collectively, because it's not just going to be a superintendent with a vision, it needs to be a system vision. And I think to have a strong strategic plan, that's going to be part of that process too. So lots of work that'll go into that, and it's not going to happen overnight, but I definitely think there's some key priorities to work on. So, but I would start with the stakeholders, and that's what's, I think, been the bucket filler or the energizing. There are lots of people invested in this process, and that's also a reflection. There's lots of people I think that'll be invested in what do we set for that strategic plan and how do we move forth. Thank you. You're welcome.
Director Nelson, my request that instead of being so formal and going clockwise and asking our questions, can we just have whoever wants to and just have conversation?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question then.
Perfect.
Okay. So I'm formulating this a little bit. So, we've received feedback from the community about various candidates formally and informally. Just living in this town, you see things and people seek us out or send us emails and that sort of thing. And like with anything, you see both sides of it. You see some people say Dr. Hahn's an internal candidate and this is why that's a good thing. And you see some people say Dr. Hahn's an internal candidate and this is why I don't think that's a good thing. So I just wanted to give you a minute to, or I'm not limiting you, give you time to respond to how you see being an internal candidate as a strength or not, or a challenge if you were chosen.
I think it's both. There's strengths and challenges that come from being an internal candidate. I have deep roots here. I'm very passionate, and I've explained with groups, it's where I love and where I want to be, and I'm committed to this district. In that sense, we've talked in the fiscal piece. I've said as when you want to be objective, and there's a lot of things that have to happen objectively when it comes to budgeting and planning. And that's sometimes difficult to do as the internal candidate because you're so attached to the system and the people within the system And I believe I told our community group too, when they've asked that question, I don't see a dollar sign in our budget. I see a program, I see a student activity, I see a staff member. And so sometimes when you come from the outside, then you're not as connected. And during fiscal challenges, that might be an advantage to come from the outside. But when I look at our education system and where we're at now, we really have been turned upside down because of a pandemic. But even prior to that, there were struggles that we've had. When we look at fiscal planning and potential operating levy, I don't think somebody can come from the outside and have a full grasp or understanding regarding to what that might look like within our community. They could learn it, but it's going to take them a long time to learn. And I don't think we have the time to wait for somebody to step in and learn all those facets. And I think to truly be successful in bridging, so we're a very polarized community at times with opinions, and I think one of the big questions or people have is how do you become that bridge builder and unite us back for the focus of our students and our programs. That is somebody that has deep relationships within a community and a deep commitment to a community. This is not just some place to land for me to have a job. This is my home, and I've stayed here for reasons. And I think that's the strength of being an internal candidate. So I think bridging and bringing us together rather than so far apart is key. I think you need to be internal to have that understanding, to understand what's happening in that direction. I think if we're going to leverage and look at different operating levy potential, you have to have an understanding and be connected to the people within the community and have those open and honest discussions. And I don't think we have 2 or 3 years to wait to start bridging those gaps and building those relationships. So internally, I think that's a very strong reason to look towards an internal candidate. The other thing is I'm a very strong believer that as a leader, you never act alone. So you'll take responsibility. So as a superintendent, I would assume ultimate responsibility, and that responsibility will fall on me. But I can tell you in the working of it, it's always done with a team. And it's going to be done collectively, and it's going to be a representation of a leadership team. And so I think that, again, those relationships and the connections that have been happening already, that's going to have some of that work be able to be accelerated when we need it to be accelerated.
Thank you.
If I can kind of build on Director Sjogren's question, and get a little more granular. I wrote these questions out, which is kind of rare for me to do, but I wanted to make sure that I was precise and direct. Direct I'm good at, precise sometimes is a problem. One of my desires to see in our next superintendent is that they raise the level of accountability with our existing administrative staff. I'm going to preface the rest of this question with the fact that I'm going to stipulate at the beginning that I think you're fabulous. The role that you do a great job. And I think Superintendent Larson is amazing as well. So whatever direction these questions and answers go, please understand that I hold both of you in the highest regard, but we have to evaluate the situation that you're coming in to replace her. So through the course of these discussions, it would seem to me that we will invariably at some point point out things about Superintendent Larson's style that maybe we would like to see improved upon. I know I plan to do that before we're out of here tonight. So I don't mean that as disrespectful to anybody in any way. Everybody involved is doing a great job, but we see holes and I want to see how they'd be filled. So I wanted to kind of, sort of level set on that. So if you were hired to be the next superintendent here in Brainerd, you would suddenly be responsible for direct supervision of an administrative staff that you operate with today on much more of a quasi-peer relationship. Is that fair to say?
Yes and no.
Okay, so I'll let you incorporate that into your answer. So what's your plan for redrawing the lines of distinction as superintendent and perhaps redefining those working relationships with people that you've worked with in other capacities for a long time?
A couple things about that. So when you talk about responsibility of supervision and evaluation. So in the unique role and with Superintendent Larson, a lot of her time, energy, and effort has gone into building projects and construction. And rightly so. She was asked to come in and help us pass a bond referendum and really focus on making that successful. And I think she's really spent a lot of time and energy doing that. In doing so, then the support of the system, especially with our administrative team, I think has come back to the assistant superintendent role. So when I look at having direct conversations with our administrators, when I look at evaluations, so Mr. Murtha and myself have met with our administrative team, meaning principals, and set their goals and talked to them about growth areas and strength areas in PD. I think the difficult part has been for our team is being able to give direction and let them go in that direction rather than waiting for a response or waiting for the approval to do so. And that's been very frustrating for our administrative team, and I don't think they fault Superintendent Larson just because of the demands of that, but in the sense when everything else is going on in the midst of a pandemic and leading buildings and opening and closing and moving, and they are looking to be trusted as administrators and to be able to make administrative decisions without asking permission to do so. And I think we have the leaders that can do that and are very capable, and I'm not talking just principals, I'm talking in a business office and a communications office. And I think understanding and being very clear of the expectations. So part of that, without a strategic plan and without priorities, we go in different directions. And I think being able to give those priorities and give that direction, but then give the support and let them do the jobs they're hired to do. And if they're not doing those jobs, then it's a different discussion to have. But I think the frustration that's come from our administrative team is it can't all come to one bottleneck. There has to be roles, responsibilities, directions given, and priorities set. And then we all work to those common priorities. So that's how I would change those.
I can jump in. I've got a quick question. And we got to talk about this a little bit in passing, so maybe just expanding or taking time to reflect on, you got to spend all day today at our schools and in our district. What stands out for you?
Just the level of commitment and passion, and it's April. And we said too, what we're finally getting to and kind of the rhythms and buildings and systems are typically what we would see in October. And it's just taken that much time and energy to get there. And still just the energy and the excitement. I think the shock of the day was the engagement with our students. Their questions were thoughtful. They were really advocating for themselves and the system. It wasn't just self-centered. They were really looking as the district as a whole. I love, like today, and I have a tip, I apologize. My role, unfortunately, has kept me pretty tied to a desk because of all the demands and the need to respond and things like that, where I have not had the capability or the abilities to be where I want to be and doing the things I want to do. And today was fantastic. To have undivided attention with support staff and your directors and your principals and students, and even you as a board, to hear the reasons why you're doing what you're doing and then to see it in action. It was beyond a bucket filler. And walking with Director Nelson and Director Black-Lance, boy, the buildings were so quiet. Well, kids were highly engaged. Right? So if I hear these things about all these things happening out of control, they're not. Walk in our hallways, come visit our buildings. And it's just, again, it was so nice. It was so nice. I didn't have one angry phone call today. But that's part of our job. We take that. Parents have concerns and people have concerns. But today, that's what was impressive. And the other thing is just the level of commitment. I am very thrilled for Brainerd Public Schools that the engagement that's occurring to hire the next superintendent. From the student side, the staff side, from the community side, and I think that's what's been rewarding too, is that there's a lot of belief in the system and the impact the system's making for our young people.
I have a question. With especially in the last, I guess, year and a half, the experiences that we've had as a school board, but also, and more importantly to this interview, is the experiences that the superintendent had, including personal attacks, the finances of the day, and the future moving forward, and then also unexpected issues that sometimes include those at a pandemic level. My question is, with those thoughts in mind, or those realities in mind, how do you care for yourself away from work?
I wasn't expecting that question.
I had a very similar one.
Did you? One, I'll give, so in just reflecting even on superintendent's tenure here, I don't know how many times she's had to pick herself back up with lots of unexpecteds. I'll go from a yearbook issue to you name it. I think historically the things that she's been presented with at a superintendent level have not been seen. And now we're seeing it statewide. So I've really admired her grit and her ability to just continue to pick up and get going and do what's right on our behalf. So I'm very grateful for that. Personally, I have a wonderful family. I have a very wonderful, supportive spouse who is deeply passionate about education as well and is very understanding. The joke around the house is Heidi says she's going to be home at this time. She pretty much gives about an hour or so leeway because it just really never happens. I'm one of those people, if somebody's going to talk, I'll stop and talk. And I have a spouse and children that are they just get it. And they're very supportive of that. So that's very beneficial. I think the other self-care is I'm getting better. I've been very bad at it. But the example of I really didn't think going into spring break I was going to apply for this position. And I had some people ask me about it, and part of it is I was really tired. It's been an exhausting few years, more so than ever before, and talk about, death threats and people who don't know me saying things. That's just not typically what you experience in education, and the ability to step away. So I had the fortunate break over spring break to just go see my mom and slow down, and I joked she can hide my phone really well. And that was a great sense of self-care. And I think giving myself permission to do that a little bit more. But the other thing is this job is a bucket filler. And I'm all about filling a bucket. And sometimes you just have to get out. Today was a bucket filler. Self-care is actually going to sit back in the classroom and hanging out with kids and getting to some of the fun events and just being really able to enjoy them and be a part of them because you want to be there.
Heidi, I want to ask you a question about the financial piece and reading even some of the comments on here and the financial condition of the district and a lot of talk about a bonding operating levy, which fortunately the rest of the group probably won't have to worry about me, but I would be dead set against it right now, and I would be for the next several years. So what I'm looking for, and I've heard comments about we're an efficient operation, and I don't think we are. I think we have a long ways to go. We're playing catch up in so many different cases. Payroll as an example, getting it online, and buying time clocks still. So what I'm wondering is, let's just assume that our taxpayers are not going to give us more state and federal tax revenue to operate this district, this business. So when I hear, well, the state's got, $1 billion, so many forget that we, as taxpayers, gave them. It's not the state money. So what I would like to look at and get a sense from how you would go about, we're a $91 million operation. Let's assume that we're not going to get any more. I really loved one of your comments or answers to the earlier question about the assumptions we've got to, or the what ifs, we can't manage under that. And I really appreciate that thought and that vision you've got. But if we have $91 million to educate 6,200 students or 300 students, whatever it might be, granted, I understand that as we increase enrollment, we'll have more dollars, but let's assume we're not going to get any more. Would you go about making sure that we balance our budget, making sure that we keep money in the piggy bank?
I mean, those are all things we need to do, and I think that's starting with that fiscal planning. We should not wait for a budget revision to make financial plans. There's some very predictable things that happen, and a lot of that, the majority of that is based on our student enrollment and ADMs. And I do think we create budgets that aren't based on the what if we've talked about. So that then allows you to have a vision or to start planning proactively than rather reactively. Unfortunately, I think in our budgeting process and our budget reduction process, it's all been reactionary. And I think that's where you hear some frustration from leadership or administrators or staffing as it happens. It's a reactionary response rather than, we shouldn't be blindsided because this has been happening for quite a while. There are structural changes. So when you look at, we really want to protect everything we can within the classroom. So what structure changes can be created? We have, a teaming model at the middle school. And that's a great model, but are there structural changes that can be more fiscally efficient? But those, again, are those plays and trying to figure out those dynamics or the priorities that exist within a district. There's some things in special ed that happen that we have to respond to, and that cost is rising. And I think having a thorough understanding of special education finance and looking at the significant amount of dollars that are coming from your general fund and that cross-subsidy, which are basically mandated services we still have to provide. But is there a different way to look at how we provide those services? That would have to be happening collectively. I think there's some services we can leverage regionally when you look at having a regional partner that really has a commitment and dollars that they're making from their cooperative purchasing to put towards educational solutions. Our high school level, we've expanded our opportunities at the high school. When you look at a 7-period day and a block schedule, there was some increase in staffing to that. So do we need to look at those places? Transportation, the hard part is transportation is a significant expense, but when you're 515 square miles, one of the reasons we had expenses go up is we didn't want kids on buses for 2 hours. So again, how do we insulate the classroom the most? How do we make things more student focused? There are changes that we can make, but they would be systematic structural changes, I think. I really think from how we're operating and how we have models in existence, we have been running very efficiently and we have been asking more of staff. But again, you have to plan proactively to be prepared for those things, because I agree, the timing of an operating levy will be very difficult for our businesses and our community members, given where we're at post-pandemic and where we're at with inflation cost. It's a very supportive, giving community, so I think there is a point and a time, and I think giving that information of why and why we're so different. But it's that planning piece. And I think there should always be an A, a B, a C, and a D. It shouldn't be, we just did the revision. And again, we're reactionary. We haven't been mindful in our planning. And again, some of that is, I think, time and energy. People say the word time clock and you think it's ancient. It's really not. It's a digital process. So if you watch people that come through, some people like to do it on their phone. Some people wait to their desk. A lot of times I watch people and they just, your secret card, whoop, boop, in. That's much more efficient than writing on pieces of paper. So those efficiencies are being created, but it also takes, we have a staff member focused on those systematic efficiencies. But again, that's in hopes of taking something off individuals' plates so we can continue to allocate that work.
I want to probe just a little further and kind of on the subject that Kevin had, is relationships with the staff. And you have great relationships with your staff. And I think it was one of the kids maybe asked this better than how I was going to ask it, but you're going to make difficult decisions as a superintendent. Like you said, the buck stops with you. Mm-hmm. And some of them are not going to be very well liked by some of these people, and that's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. What was in here was, and maybe I'll ask it this way, what's your level of comfort in saying no to individuals you have close relationships with in the district?
I think
to talk a little more about that.
So in every leadership role, your relationships change. And I've experienced that as I've moved up in administration. However, I'm a person that I believe what you see is what you get. I'm in clear communication. I believe clear is kind. And if you're making the decisions for the right reason and you can tell the person that you're making that decision and why, I feel like I've done what I need to do. And they can respect me for that. And I feel I've done that consistently. And so I do see that I have strong relationships, but I think if you talk to the people that I have those relationships with, they know I can say no. They know I've made difficult decisions. There's going to be more difficult decisions coming. And again, they're collective decisions, right? There shouldn't be a sole dictator making those decisions. However, the responsibility does stop with that individual. And so I look at, as a superintendent, having that collaborative leadership with a team, making sure we're making decisions in the best interest of our students. And there are difficult. Every time there's a budget cut, every single step of it has been difficult because it's a person or a program. And so there will be people that are mad. I'm already prepared for that. There may be some relationships that I lose. But I know that I'll make the decision very genuine, with genuine intent, for the betterment and for the purpose of improving things for our students. And I think people that I keep in my circle or the friendships I have respect that. Typically the ones that they're not in my circle of friends. But it changes things. But I've been here 26 years and I think people know where I stand and how I stand. And at least if I'm going to tell them no, they're going to have good reasons of why I'm saying no. Not that it's a personal choice.
Well, I'll take it just one more step further. If I can, I'll use words from your interview last week, your own words. I may not be your most qualified candidate, but I guarantee I'm going to be the one that's most committed, the one who's going to work hard and do what needs to be done. Given that, I don't want to put a time limit on it, 100 days or something like that. Just say, given that, when and if you step into the superintendent role, can you outline, like those priorities day one, the things you would do to challenge yourself to kind of, expand into that role?
Absolutely. So we have the gift in June of having a leadership retreat. We used to call it a retreat because we'd lock ourselves in room 200 for 2 days. But we actually now, thanks to some collective regional support where all administrators are getting together across the region, we work in those teams, and I think that would be where it would first start. I think it would be sharing out. I don't know that our administrative team has had the opportunity to see the feedback, but I think it would be very important from the minute you hire the superintendent, whoever that is, to give them that feedback so they can start to learn and see and become much more actively engaged in the process. It is going to take a leadership team to move this district forward, and they will have to be actively present. So I see in June starting that. I also see really starting to leverage the relationships with our business partners. I have not, like I shared very openly in the community forum, had that opportunity or really honestly the time to sit down and learn. The data that Tyler was very much just rattling off, well, what does that mean for schools? What should it look like? And getting that insight and feedback. Learning from the business owners, they were very articulate about needs and what about the operating levy came across in every focus group, but what does that mean? What does that look like? Communication, I've talked about being a priority. What do people need? A lot of individual conversations with our administrative team, building further connections with our community, and then really putting that together into here's our next steps and going through a very formal strategic planning process and having that be very transparent and having lots of input. And that's what's been energizing today is people want to be a part of that. And they want to know what are our priorities and where are we headed. So we talk about why Brainerd Public Schools. Well, I want to know what's important to you and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And to me, that's part of a strategic plan. And that allows a leadership team to be very laser focused on next steps and outcomes that need to happen. And every single part of that is in improving outcomes for students. Achievement, mental health, well-being, well-rounded education. There's multi-facets to having that plan lead to that.
Thinking about that a little bit, just, we're all here because we're focused on the kids and on the students and the outcomes that we achieve through what we have to offer here. If you were to think about what you want for each student coming out of Brainerd, what does that checklist look like? What do you want their experience to be?
I want it to be one that they loved rather than something they feel they just got through. Right? I don't want them to feel like they just survived high school and got to a finish line. I want it to be something that's building who they are as a person and where they want to go. And I've said it multiple times, at no point in time should a student in our district ever feel less than. And I put the same for our staff and for a community member, for anybody that steps through these doors, less than. And that's where I want that outcome to be. I was challenged, I was valued, I have the skills I need to go where I want to go next. And that looks very different for lots of students for lots of reasons. And I think our responsibility is to give them the pathways and to have those options. And to me, that's where Brainerd does an amazing job. There are a lot of ways and a lot of activities and opportunities for a student to get connected and to figure out to who they are as an individual. Because again, as I said, adult parenting is hard, but what do we want? We want our students and our children to grow up strong and to feel loved and supported and to know where they can go and how they're going to get there. And that's our responsibility. So that's what I want. I want that to be a place they want to come. School shouldn't just be a place to go. It should be a place you feel like you belong and that you're figuring out how to get to that next step.
So as a follow-up to that, I love to go a little deeper and hear examples, and I'm sure there's a ton of them, but I'd love to hear, I'm guessing if that's your vision, and we're probably a lot of the way there for many students, but I don't think we're there for every student. So it's an idea that you have or an initiative or something that would get us closer to every student feeling like that.
And I think, so I'll give kudos to our Equity Advisory Council. They're really trying to focus based on that student survey, and it was very evident with the students today, that student voice. And so we can think we know, but to actually sit and listen. And I really think the solution about a lot of the things we're missing is going to come from the students. It's not going to come from the adults. They had some very clear ideas of what they felt they needed. They've had very clear ideas of what they were missing. So it might take adults to help us navigate and come to those solutions and put the resources in place, but I think they're the ones identifying. And there are some students that have felt very isolated and that school isn't responding to their needs. Those are the areas we can continue to grow. But I do think we have a very comprehensive services, but not all students are feeling connected to that. So I think the idea came from them. Come sit down with us more. Come see what it's like. One student recalled having back in the day of lunch with Lane and how powerful that was for him. He missed it because it hasn't happened for COVID and a lot of reasons. But that student actually felt that they were having access to then a system changer, which their teachers and everybody in the building is a system changer, but they felt that they had that connection and voice. So I think more of that. They want to be honored and they want to be, identified for what they're doing. And I think sometimes we haven't done a very good job of that. We're not necessarily reflective of everything that's happening. But today the students talking, I think, was really powerful. So that would be one. I think some of our staff are doing how they can, but I don't know that we collectively bring them together to keep talking about how does that tie into what we need to do next, or where does that fit into the plan? Right now it just seems to be, this teacher's really working hard and we'll start this group and is going to support this and create this opportunity for students, where that should be part of a systematic approach.
Heidi, what does successful diversity, equity, and inclusion look like? And then also, how will you involve our community?
Well, we have a long way to go to say we're successful. And I think I keep boiling it down, and you've heard me say, I think success would be when we don't have somebody saying that they felt less than, or isolated, or not included. That's when I think we'll start to be on that path of success. And I think equity shouldn't even be something we would have to be talking about, because it would just be embedded in everything we do. It becomes a way of work and passion and process, rather than right now, boy, it's a very cognizant discussion and there's efforts. And so I think to see success, you're going to see that reflected in every facet of our system. And I shout out to Erin Karlgaard and her courageous leadership and her wisdom, and to the parents that are stepping up and being willing to have those open conversations. I think the community conversation and seeing how well it was attended was a sign of we're taking steps and heading in the right direction, and they want to be engaged with us. And I think the more engagement we have and the more partnership we have, that'll be the success. But I don't even know that there's a measure, because it's just going to be something we need to continually do, and we need to do for all students and for each student. It bothers me for each staff to say when they have felt that they haven't been part of something or ignored. That's very disturbing.
Well then, if I can build on Director Blacklance's question a little bit. The reason that this one leapt to mind for me was specific to the Equity Council. Mm-hmm. As you know, I sit on that council, have not been as good about being at all the meetings as I should be, but I think, that stands out to me as a really great example of an issue that's very important to me from a macro sense, which is transparency. Mm-hmm. It's really the main reason I ran for this seat. I would also caveat that I don't believe that a lot of the transparency issues that we have under Superintendent Larson's leadership, from my perspective, are intentional. I believe they're cultural. So when I look at something like the Equity Council, where, as far as I know, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, it's one of the few advisory, if the only advisory group that exists that's within the school district itself that does not allow public to attend it at this time. Am I correct in that? Project Oversight has, public can attend it. Is there any other council that doesn't allow?
Public does not attend project oversight.
But they're allowed to if they want to, are they not?
I don't know if DAC does.
So at any rate, it's immaterial to a certain extent, but where I was going with that is really kind of looking at your vision. Because I've had, obviously, the opportunity to work directly with you on a number of different things, and I've found your ability to rise to a level of transparency to be good. And steal a word from Director Haglund, I'd like to get to great from good with the district as a whole. I think we'll never get where we need to get in the eyes of public perception, because there's always going to be a segment of the population that thinks we're hiding in the back room and getting paid under the table for putting masks on kids or whatever, right? You can only fight the fight you can win. So it's a long way of asking this question, which is knowing how important transparency is, and knowing that you can never really fully win the fight and be recognized for being fully transparent. What would you, as Superintendent Hahn, do to both increase the transparency profile to the public and in your dealings with those underneath you through the administrative hierarchy, as well as up to us at the Board of Education level?
But the interesting thing with school, we're huge, right? There's so many things happening. And I'll reflect back to, a parent question. And we kind of facetiously joked, I don't think there's one teacher trying to hide anything. And so it's great when we have those parents engaging and asking the questions, and I think they need to know that they have permission to come in and ask those questions. And I go back to the equity advisory, so we made a very strong commitment, and this board made a very strong commitment to reflecting and taking a look at our practices and how we need to embed equity into those practices. Well, as you learn, there's some infancy in that. So the one parent who joined us, who was just, a couple, we had examples on that journey, the more they learned and the more they were part of it. So I wish we could say in the foundation of that advisory that the minutes were online and that we had a beautiful strategic plan and it was posted and all the definitions were done, but that was some of the inner workings of it. And I think it's being genuine with that, and it's letting people know, you come on in and take a look into our buildings, ask those questions, and we will respond. It's not meant to be, like you said, in secrecy or done. So as a superintendent, I will continue to push that. And I think we've been doing that as a system. Not allowing people into our buildings didn't help our cause at this time. So because of COVID and closing buildings, people were feeling like they couldn't come in and look. They're always welcome. I mean, we have volunteer procedures and things like that. But I think it's continuing to have that openness and that communication. And you're right, we're never going to please everybody, but it's certainly going to be that we're doing things in the best interest of children. It's certainly going to be that we're trying to improve outcomes for every single student, for each student in what direction they're heading, and that is going to look different. But I do, trying to have that. If you go on our website, really, there is thousands of pieces of information. And so navigating that sometimes, so simplifying some of the communication, having a clear communication plan, responding. I think you as a board, the importance of public comment, and you've done a very good job. In my 20 plus years of being here, I don't know that I've ever seen a school board respond so personally and have personal conversations with their community members. But you also need to know that we have staff members in every facet of our system that are trying to do the same thing. And I think that's the transparency piece that needs to continue to be validated. Some of that communication and transparency is the validation that it is happening. It might not be happening as fast enough, or it may be admitting that we're in the infancy. And when that advisory council started, we had no plan. We were really trying to figure it out and navigate ourselves, because our plan is going to look different because it's Brainerd Public Schools compared to the next district's plan to the next district's plan. It has to be reflective of the community we live in. And I think that's the work that we've really been trying to do, and that's in every facet. Thank you. You're welcome.
Talk a little bit about, since the pandemic, we know we've always had need for more mental health and social emotional learning And it's only become more since the pandemic. So talk a little bit about your thoughts of what you would do in that area. I know we've wanted to hire more counselors, and we have a little bit here and there, but then they get cut. And
Yeah, that's, the gift is, when you look at school counselors, they're very few and far between, and their demands are different. Our school counseling staff at the middle school looks very different than the high school, because there's so many different, if you think about credit requirements and things, they take different directions. But Brainerd Public Schools, that's, my start in this district was as a mental health professional. So we've had a 30-plus year longstanding partnership of having mental health available in our system. I think sometimes it's letting families and students know, but I also think because it's so embedded in our system, people don't necessarily see it there. A lot of our students, it just feels like they're going to a class, not that they're going to a mental health service. And speaking with our mental health professionals as well as our school staff, what we have seen is an increase in kind of that depression and anxiety. And that really is, I think, the counterplay that's playing out. Our students have felt very isolated in that. Their routines were disrupted and interrupted, and I discussed with the community too, just in reading the scholarship applications, things that our students used to do second nature, that really blew up. And so our littles coming into buildings, boy, talk about having the ability to regulate, meaning be able to know my routines and be able to express myself without being kind of dysregulated, disruptive. They haven't had that support and that consistency. And the other thing is when you're left more isolated, I look at what happened in social media, and when you don't want to talk about mental health issues, kids really started to feel like they had permission because they weren't physically getting to see each other. So then we resorted to that. Well, then it led to some really, I think we've had targeting, but it even got larger through that process. We're also living in a time, and that was very clear from our students, right now when there's a culture where you can come and say and do and threaten and really feel that there's no recourse because that's what they're seeing play out. I mean, we heard the kids in the school building say, we just want to come back into the building and be kids. We're tired of feeling this polarized. What are you going to do to help us do that? Because they haven't been able to navigate it themselves. And so I think embedding in that, so when you talk about social emotional learning, that's actually just part of the daily teaching. So for example, we have zones of regulation in elementary. So really getting students to understand how they're feeling, where they're at, what that might happen. So really giving them that perspective taking and that self-awareness, that's all mental health as well. And I think that's increasing. We'll never be able to respond to everything, but I think we have immediate access to a crisis. So if we have a student who's in crisis or suicidal, we have a response right there. I don't know that a lot of systems have that. We have that right there where our staff know and our families and our students know that they have that access. We have strong connections with the community to connect students to that. But you'll have families say, I've met with multiple families who will say, my student has this significant need and I have talked and I have tried and I can't get in. So I'm on a wait list for 4 months and I don't know that my child can wait that long. And so again, that's shifted back to schools. And if you talk to our staff, they'll tell you they've been counselors and support, but it takes that whole system and lifting up. And I believe we have a community that helps support and wrap around. We have more mental health access, and where I think we're falling down a little bit and we have a ways to catch up is for our staff. This isn't just our students that are suffering with some mental health issues and anxiety issues. It's our staff. But I do think we have that access. Can it continue to grow? From the school counseling side, we have collaborative workers that are in our elementaries that are kind of serving in that role. However, that's really creative funding through ADSYS grants. That's a slip up, ADSYS grants and local time study dollars. That's creative ways that the district has leveled to get that resource in, but that isn't a resource that we've embedded. That's a resource that we've creatively written other dollars to access to get that in. So I do think there's growth that we could do on the elementary and early childhood side for that.
I'd like to get your thoughts. Last week I was, just looking at strictly from resumes and experiences. And in fact, we had even heard from our consulting team that they had a handful of other applicants or superintendents that didn't advance forward. And in our own place of business, and outwardly, many times you can go higher on the outside and you bring in those fresh ideas potentially. The flip side is when you promote from within, you know what you're getting. And in this case, I think it's nice we know what we're getting. In fact, we're blessed because either way, you're going to be our superintendent or our assistant superintendent, right? So
I hope so.
either
Unless,
way,
unless there's something you gotta tell me when this meeting's done, that'd be
Unless you
great.
do really bad on.
All right, unless I really blow it.
but either way, we get to we get to have you help lead this district. So. The question I've got is that last week, one of the questions was, what are the three main things you would do when you're superintendent's position? What are the top three things? And as you indicated all three, they were like, yep, that's 1, 2, and 3. You've got the right answer. Strategic planning, the enrollment piece, the financial plan, and the overachiever that you are, you asked if you could have a fourth one, and that was that communication plan. So I think it's absolutely wonderful, and it's exciting that you've got that vision. This is what I would do as superintendent. So maybe my unfair question is, as assistant superintendent, and I was sharing just a little bit to Director Nelson before we went to dinner that I think I've been kind of wrapped up in these last couple of years in almost kind of disappointed that, other than a Blueprint 181, it's like, well, what happened to our students and where, how are we doing this? So when you rattle these 4 things off, with good intentions, good thought, they're just spot on to me. My question is, have you not been empowered or in a position as assistant superintendent to help with those? We haven't been able to do that. Like I said, maybe it's an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway to see, as assistant superintendent, that in all of our directors, we need them to be empowered. We need them to drive their areas of accountability. I see this as a critical thing. I love those 4. It's perfect. But why haven't we been able to do anything with that for these last few years? And if I could I'd like to keep the building and COVID out of a response. So I might be putting you in a kind of a bad, awkward spot, but it's important to me to know or understand. I just want to get, you know what I'm asking?
I totally know what you're asking, and so I'm going to speak personally for myself, and I'll encourage you to seek input from our other leadership team and our team in leadership roles and responsibilities. I really feel like the greatest asset I could bring to Superintendent Larson was my years of experience in this district, and I think because of, and I'm not faulting, but because of directions that had to go, that was not leveraged to the capacity it could have been. I also am a person that stays in my lane. I think we've had conversation too. I'm not going to speak to you as a board member because that's the superintendent's job. And so I think all of us fall and look for that leadership to happen from our superintendent. And I think when it comes to clarity of role, responsibility, expectations, that necessarily didn't get carried through as much as I would have liked to have seen it be carried through. I know there were times that I felt frustrated and had to try to navigate that, rather than being able to hear, this is where we're going, this is what I need, this is what you're gonna do, and then trusting myself as a leader to do that, because I do think people are in leadership roles for reasons, and they have the capacity and the ability to do the jobs they need, but they still need to know the direction they're headed. And when we leave direction up to chance, I think some of those things did not come to fruition like they should have. And do I believe that they're absolutely possible, whether I'm your superintendent or not? 100%. And I think you have the right people in the right places and doing the right work for the right reasons to have significant outcomes come in those areas. And so if it's a different superintendent that comes in, that would be my next question is, what are our roles? What are our responsibilities? Where are we headed? And let us do the work to get there, because no one person does it on their own. So that's a very difficult question to answer, but that's an honest answer. So I'll answer that for myself, but I would really encourage, if you're seeking more input on that, to have that conversation, because I do feel that there's people in positions and their leadership capacity and skills have not been leveraged to the extent that they should be and can be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll ask a question that's similar but different. So let's say you come through the other side of this experience and you're the new superintendent at Brainerd Public Schools. And then I'll make an assumption, because I don't know what the leadership structure looks like, but you've talked about the importance of a leadership team around you. Let's just assume that an assistant superintendent role would be backfilled. What skill set do you need in that person as your assistant superintendent?
She stole the other question. I'll be honest, when I've heard some budget discussions and changes, I've had a little bit of a panic attack because I think the role of an assistant superintendent is, to use a sports analogy, you need to be a really high quality backup quarterback and be ready at any point in time, and you need to be responsive to the needs that are around you. So when I look for an assistant superintendent, it needs to be the individual that people can get a hold of and contact. So I feel like I talk to our principals and multiple times a day. They need to have that support. But I also feel there needs to be an open channel of communication and being honest, right? I want the assistant superintendent to be the one that disagrees with me, that shows me the pros and the cons, to say this is what I'm hearing, this is what I know, this is what direction I think we need to go, and to have that safe space to do that. I would want them to be very active and energetic and involved, and very visible in connecting with our staff and students. It's a very eclectic role in the assistant superintendent, especially in this system, because you are involved in every system, in every department. And I think it's being able to have somebody to continue to champion along that plan or that cause, but be able to be the one who's going to give it to you straight every single time. So I think that would be very important, and somebody that I think our community can trust and that our staff can trust. Somebody that wants to live here and make a life here, not just land here, I think would be also very important in that role.
Thanks.
Well, since Director Sjogren stole one of my questions, now I'm going to reverse the train and take it the other way down the tracks. Now, you've had pretty good seats for the last few years of Superintendent Larson's interaction with the Board of Education. As a new superintendent in Brainerd, with the benefit of hindsight, which of course is 2020, what are some obstacles that maybe currently exist or did exist in the past that you would try to engage this body, this board, to partner with you to get removed to further those goals that you've outlined so eloquently in all of your other answers?
Well, the best part about being a superintendent is the superintendent has a boss, and the boss is the Board of Education. I think it would be really working on that plan collectively, but making sure the nice thing about, or what I expect from a school board, would be that you are the reflection of our community. You are elected to these seats for reasons, and our members of our community have elected you to those seats, so you should be representing their voices. So again, that's the outside coming in as well. So I see that being in partnership. I've seen some things happen with this board where I think you've been put in positions where you might feel like you need to manage or respond, where really governing and giving that guidance and that partnership is the ultimate piece. And so that strategic plan, I think, is key, because really then it is the voices collectively coming together. It is the priorities collectively being set. And then we know what direction we're headed. And we know what lanes we need to stay in, for lack of more articulate words. We know our purpose and our role, and I think that's the difference. So hindsight 2020, I think we were all united on buildings. I mean, it's rolling forward, and that's been great. But there's been a lot of other work, and there is a lot more important work of what's happening within those buildings. And I think that's the partnership. There's unique opportunities in training times. I think anytime a new superintendent comes, there's a new dynamic and relationships that have to be forged and expectations. But that would be my hope and my expectation from a board, is that we have that plan, and no matter where we're at different points, we're still united on that plan because it's impacting and having the greatest impact on our students.
Thank you.
A couple of years ago, before I even came onto the board, my role as a parent was also advocate for my children. And the one thing that I experienced along the way was, and I'll be honest, even once I stepped onto the board for the first year or two, is I had to be able to ask the right question at the right time under the right temperature, or simply be able to ask the magical question to get either a response. I mean, typically I'd get a response, but I wouldn't always necessarily get the answer. And myself, at 50 years old, I still ask the question, why? And if you spend 10 minutes with my son, it's definitely, he hasn't fallen far from the tree. He'll ask 30 whys. But my point is that it's really tricky for a layperson at times in our district to be heard, or to get a response that they, maybe not the response they want, but at least a response that allows them to feel heard and part of a process. So with that being said, how would you build on that process that is existing right now within our school district to allow parents, or even a parent group like we have, that they might be not always knowing the right magical question about accessing teacher information, or I guess part of their curriculum. But how would you build on that, or recreate or re-envision that process to meet the needs of our parents in our community?
That's a really great question, Charles. So there is a significant importance that happens with setting your strategic plan or priorities. And so when you think about decisions being made, that should be the why. So why this? It's because this is what's been set forth as a priority. Drilling all the way down to the parent level, it is getting that access or that involvement to the parent. And sometimes they don't even know the question to ask because they're not quite sure what they're asking. And I think that's the work that continues to happen. I think our educational staff have done a significant job of trying to be as transparent as possible as the ability to provide that access. I think our Department of Teaching and Learning continues to be and making parents more aware of processes that are in place and how these processes happen. Probably more so now than ever. I mean, that is the blessing of some of the polarization that's occurring, is it's making us reflect. It's making us think. It's making us as educators go back and ask the parent why. But part of it, it's taking the time to listen. There's incredible access right now to our educational system, from email. I kind of get the giggles. I'll get the text, and then the cell phone call, and then they'll finally call the office number, and then I might get an email. Right, so there's multiple modalities that people are trying to get that information from, but carving out that time to actually have them get that information. I think, and take COVID and things out of it, but I just remember coming into the Brainerd system and sitting in kindergarten classroom with Mrs. Dunphy and Miss Larson. That was after all day, thank God every day kindergarten came, and there were 31 of them on balls. I was a brave teacher to put the kids on balls. But I remember Mrs. Dunphy looking at me and saying, hey, guess what? Your kids are going to come home and tell you lots of things. But just remember your kids coming back into the classroom and telling me lots of things that are happening. And so before we both decide to make a judgment, let's sit down and let's chat. And let's figure out the why and the context of things that are happening. And I think I keep that in my mind all the time, of that pearl of wisdom, because it is so true. And I just even think now in the system, I don't know sometimes the questions to go ask. But I think trying to listen and to learn. And I agree. We've heard it from multiple staff. I first heard it from Willie Severson. I think our parents are bringing their best to us every day. And we take that best and we grow on that. But it's giving them permission to be part of that partnership and to not be afraid to ask the question. And to even say I have a question, but I'm not even really sure what I'm asking, so help me figure it out. So the curriculum piece, I mean, we send home lots of books. I honestly feel a blessing too of COVID was opening up that door and letting the classrooms be seen. The best part is we now physically get to open those doors again. And I think we have an engaged community and parent groups who want to be part of the process, and that's going to help us.
I think many of the issues that we have as it relates to everything from the board to the administration to just the district as a whole and our on-again, off-again relationship with the community as a whole. I think Director Blackland's got down to the parent level. Now I'm going to take it up a level to that more nebulous and difficult to quantify them, the community as a whole, which represents, of course, obviously a bunch of different viewpoints. So I'm going to give you a specific example that I was not particularly thrilled with how it was handled in the long run. And it's hypothetical, but not.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you how you would do it differently as superintendent, perhaps, or not. Okay? So this is not all that long ago, but we had an issue where there was a piece of material used in a class, in a curriculum, that a student took a picture of. Then it got circulated through the community. Then it came back to the board and to you and to everybody else. And then what I would say from that point forward was all the I's were dotted, all the T's were crossed. In other words, everybody here did their jobs in terms of investigating the issue, determining what the remediation, if any, needed to be, and following protocols, procedures, and doing all of that. But since the complaint initiated from the community, as best I can recall, the only notification that this situation had been dealt with was to us. And then maybe to the administration. There was never completion of the circle back to the people that initiated the complaint. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. And I realize that no matter how many times you do that with being fully effective, sometimes most of the troubles that we have as a district and vice versa, the community in dealing with us is we have a lot of, ready, fire, aim going on, where, people get on their horses and ride without really checking what they're riding into. But this particular case stood out to me because it was handled well, but we didn't complete the narrative to the original complainant. And I'd like to know, as superintendent, from a cultural perspective, what would you maybe have done differently in that situation or not?
Well, I think there's lots of things in that situation that we've learned from. And I think one of the things, when you talk about full transparency, that our educational staff, and if you watch the political climate across the country about that transparency, is being very cognizant of how material is presented, right? Because in that particular instance, there was a whole series of things that led to how that piece of information could be perceived. But in isolation, as an educator, we have to be prepared for how it could be perceived and being prepared for that, rather than it was one of multiple pieces of information given. So really having our staff reflect on that. I think the original of that complaint, there was a personal conversation with. I can tell you that the administrator of the building had multiple conversations with people that brought that forward, but did we put it back on social media with how it was resolved? We did not. And I don't know that I would go back and put it out on social media. I would really want, and that's, again, speaking with some of our community members, if there's a concern, come talk to us about it or give us that phone call. There's so many things that grow legs and walk, for lack of a better articulate term. And honestly, if we spent all the time chasing all those, we'd be exhausted, and it would really take away from what we're doing for kids. But from that original, if they felt they hadn't been responded to, that bothers me, because I do feel like we've tried to be very responsive to the concerns being brought forward to us. I think we could send out a blast almost every day about how we did this or how we responded to this. But again, I also think we're very negligent in putting out the message of the things that are going on and the things that are amazing and the things that are having significant outcomes for students because we're so busy doing the work. But to change that narrative, I don't know that I would have put a full circle social media response on. I would have been happy to have further discussion. I think the instructors and the administrator were, and I also think we're grateful to that community member because, again, you take something in its isolation, it can be perceived lots of different ways. So what we learned from that, what we continue to learn, and I think it's been happening all along, is the more open our doors become, which they became very open during distance learning and having to be online, every piece of information that was developed and lesson plans, and if it was a worksheet, but we don't call it any, we're in digital classrooms, but everybody could see that at any point in time, and they should. We're public education. We're not, I kind of joke, there's nobody running around trying to hide what they're doing. As a matter of fact, we're thrilled that people are highly engaged and invested in that outcome. So I think I would be That was a long roundabout. I feel like I'm doing a Director Boyles to give the answer to that question. But I think it is having that response of let's have that conversation and learn more. But I don't want to add legs to something that's already walking. I want to be able to fix it and make sure that they understand. And again, a parent that sat here tonight, it's like, have you been in our building? Have you talked to that teacher? Have you walked the hallway? If you haven't, please come in. Come to an event. Again, the Warrior Day that the high school put on was just, we had a job fair, so kids were finding summer work. We had a career fair, so they're looking at careers. We had a lunch jam. We had a polar plunge. We had native dancers. We had a talent show. There was so much happening. It was so overstimulating, and it was so exciting. But what an awesome event for our kids. But if the community could have stepped in, we were meal packing. They packed 25,000 meals. Come watch the kids in action. Come watch the staff that are supporting those kids in action. So to me, that's the answer to some of those. And there are things, we're human, we're gonna make mistakes. We all have biases. Sometimes those biases play out very different and they're interpreted very different depending on who we're in front of. We need to admit we make those mistakes. We need to admit we have that bias, but we need to be open and willing to have the conversation and again, engage and have no one feeling less than.
Well, we've gone a little over our hour here, so if anyone has any other pressing questions, otherwise I want to open it up. Is there anything that you wanted to say that you haven't been able to say?
I'm grateful that you've chosen to be school board members. And I go back to my original interview and asking you, what was your last student activity that basically, filled your bucket? But that's another why Brainerd. You're not running for political office. You're running because you care about kids. You're serving to make sure that we're doing the right things to have an impact on our kids, which then have a phenomenal impact on our community. And that's a gift. And so I appreciate, and I'm very anxious for the upcoming elections. So if I was your boss, I joke, we practice the 4 R's. I shred anything about retirement, resignation, all those things. We don't do it. We just keep the good ones around. But I hope that there's that engagement coming back from our community as well, and I think you guys have set the stage for that to happen. So thank you for your commitment. And I just have to say, it has been one of the best bucket-filling days I have had in a long time. And so I am just very grateful for the opportunity to sit with you and to sit with the members of our community and our students and have the opportunity and the honor of interviewing to be your next superintendent. It's been a gift. And like I said, I'm a win-win. I'm going to stick around and work no matter where you have me, unless you put me someplace else, which hopefully it's in a good spot. So.
We do need bus drivers too. So.
I did. I wanted to spell that myth. It was easier than I thought. So just so you know, it's like driving a car. You just have to turn a little wider. Thank goodness they let you practice at the fairgrounds. So I have done that, just haven't built it into the schedule to get that license. But now we have some phenomenal staff. So I haven't gone that far yet. So if you tell me that's what I'm supposed to do, I probably say, okay, we'll go do that.
And just one thing, as we're talking about the community and stuff, whether you're our superintendent or assistant superintendent, I think we have to purposely make it a point to invite community members, because it's really hard even as a school board member, I go when I get invited if I can. Mm-hmm. But if you don't get invited, so I think we have to be more purposeful on inviting her. And I just wanted to say that so I don't forget it, because sometimes I forget.
Well, I think that's, again, telling her story.
Yeah.
They need to know what's happening to be engaged and want to be a part of that. And we have a lot more story to tell.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Heidi Hahn.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Nice to get to know you.
Nice to get to know you as well. Thank you for the time and the energy spent today. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have on here a note of review and comments, but I think that's for our last board meeting.
So can I be dismissed? I just want to make that clear. I don't want to.
She left early.
Can I be excused from class? Are we all good? Or do you need me to?
You may be excused.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
She's hung around while we deliberated.
Well, I don't think we do that until the last night, so.
Right, sure.
So we can skip that. So we will see you again tomorrow at 4:45, and then at our dinner, and it's 7:30 here. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
Second. Oh, go ahead, Charles.
Okay, first from Director Hagelin, a second from Director Blacklands. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those
As long
opposed,
as
same
you'll
sign, motion
accept a
carried.
yep.
What's that?
As long as you'll accept a yep.
Okay,
My apologies, I thought we had an hour and 15 or an hour and a half. I wouldn't have asked that last question.
No, that's fine, that's good.
When we started a
maybe it
little bit
was, I
late
don't
too.
know, we
so
did, yeah.
I think as long as we're mindful that we.
You're adjourned.
Official adjourned. Yep.
Yes. Didn't I say it? We are adjourned.